Great. Well, we will get started here, and our guest is Stephen Poplin, longtime professional astrologer and author, and Stephen has been at this since the 1970s, and he specializes in rectification, transits and progressions, astrodrama, mundane research, astrocartography, Edgar Casey on astrology, and couples counseling. And his websites are www.transpersonal.us and stephen-poplin.com. So you can find him there. And with that brief introduction, I am going to turn it over to Stephen. And we're going to hear all about the Pluto Return, and which should be very fascinating.
Yes. Thank you, Ted. It's nice to be back here in the Asheville group. I wish I were actually in the mountains because I love them. A lofty position to be in. I start off here by the communication that I had a couple of months ago with Ronnie. And I was talking about, what shall I talk about? You know, there's so many themes. And so this is what I wrote, and I wanted to read this because there's some couple of words in here I wanted to play with, because I like to play with words, and Pluto likes to play with words. So, it's spring 2022. What topic should I present? I have interests and experience in various forms of astrology, Davison relationship charts, etc. But hey, heck, what's on the news? What in tarnation? So, and with that, I take a look at where Pluto was in 1776. It's there again after 248 years. And I want to tell you a little bit more about tarnation. Actually used in New England and southern United States, and for a long time. Actually, I thought it was British, but it came here many years ago. And it means the act of damning or the condition of being damned. It's an interjection used to express anger or annoyance. Sometimes in my experience, it's also kind of surprise and a little bit of a playfulness, as in Jed Clampett on the Beverly Hillbillies. So the word history of the noun and interjection, tarnation, illustrates a phenomenon called taboo deformation. You can tell we're already in Pluto land, right? And these are a bunch of words that are considered offensive or impolite under some circumstances and are made more acceptable or softer sounding by altering one or more sounds that make up the words. Tarnation appears to be a variant of darnation, itself a taboo deformation of damnation, in the same way that darn is an alteration of damn. Tarnation, however, seems to have been influenced by tarnal. Everybody knows the word tarnal. Another mild oath that is derived from the adjective eternal, as used in eternal damnation. For instance, the taboo deformations of darn, darnation, and tarnation have been used in New England since the late 1700s. I got that from the American Heritage Dictionary. And I just wanted to point that out because as we talk this evening, we're going to be discussing some tarnation episodes and some darn interesting ideas and speculative euphemisms. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. I must admit, it is the topic of this evening, USA Pluto Return. And I'm going to, as I said, play with a couple of different words and perspectives. We start by introducing the players. State the intended goal. Okay, I got it. Introducing the players. Here we go, introducing the players, okay? And here it is, of course, number one, Pluto. And we know that Pluto is in Capricorn. It's been there since 2008 and slowly going through the sign of Capricorn. When it went into that sign in 2008, that was coincidentally the beginning of the Great Recession and the many stock market foibles, as it were, that got a lot of people into trouble. People lost a lot of money, the devaluation of a lot of properties and so forth. All of that happened just exactly when Pluto went into the sign of Capricorn, which is very much about big business, larger endeavors, governmental reactions to such things. But here we now come into that very long orbit of Capricorn, Pluto there. And as you probably know, it takes 248 years to go around the zodiac. I'm also going to be pointing out the third house because I use a particular horoscope, and I'm going to be making my case for that here in just a second. But it's a very interesting chart. And again, whatever horoscope, whatever time that you use, we're still going to be talking about Pluto. Pluto, the god of the underworld, and transformational, transpersonal. It is, something that is very, very powerful. It represents the intensity that one finds in many different places: perseverance, power, obsessions, intrigue, sexuality, surprise, surprise, that might be forbidden or suspicious, and to some people rather shocking. Intense studies or hobbies, the occult, recycling, inheritance, seclusion, jealousy, possessiveness, all of these different things with the very intriguing far off planet of Pluto. Karmic lessons, the shadow, manipulation, caves and places underground, recognizing that Pluto, or Hades in Greek, was the god of the underworld. And I think that it's no big surprise that when it was discovered in 1930, here in the United States, we had, of course, prohibition. And the reaction to prohibition was the underworld. And so the mafia and their friends were going to be making whiskey and beer and so forth anyway. And suddenly a bunch of people who were just having wine on one Saturday night, when we had prohibition coming up the following week, they were suddenly criminals. And so here we had an example of government and large groups of people striving to force a certain type of morality upon the rest of the population. And we all know that that did not work out very well. So people who may be connected with Pluto: lovers planning rendezvous, infiltrators, revolutionaries, spies, astrologers. Hey, how y'all? Metaphysicians, hypnotists. I already mentioned the mob, criminals, the underworld, but also psychiatrists and lesser gods. Catalysts, Robin Hoods, CIA, magicians, geologists, missionaries, sexual abusers or perpetrators, criminologists, people connected with death or dying, elimination, annihilation. There's so many different levels of where we can go with Pluto. So this topic, of course, is going to be rather, profound, and maybe even for some people, if we have any born-again Christians in the group, it might be a bit surprising. We have a really great photo here of Pluto and Charon, sometimes called Charon. And this, of course, was the boat keeper that took those who had died upon the boat across the river to Hades, to the underworld. And that was, of course, then another aspect of Pluto. And notice how large that moon is in comparison with little Pluto. There are 5 moons around Pluto, and Charon is the largest, and all of them kind of mystically inclined. So yes, we have got amazing Pluto as our focus point today. And although I have said so many things that might not be so complimentary of Pluto, we have to remember that in 2015, when we had that special space probe that went over and took those fabulous pictures, that the really fabulous surprise was that there's a heart shape on the planet. Y'all remember when that came out? And it's almost like, from Pluto with love. And but then you have to be careful, like, well, what kind of love you talked about, Pluto? I see some straps connected to the bedposts over there. And so I wanted to point that out because, yes, it was a lovely surprise to see that heart shape. You see that on the right-hand side of the planet. And so it's also telling us about the positive things of Pluto, and sometimes Pluto being misunderstood, that even with some rather heavy dynamics, evolutionary consciousness is very profound. And sometimes we have to destroy something so that something great can be born. For instance, I believe that Pluto also connected now with under the ground, that you may have a visit, if Pluto becomes very strong in your chart, with a plumber. You may have some termites. You may have some stuff behind the walls that you cannot see that needs to be attended to. It's also when someone wants to put in a new kitchen. Well, you have to tear out the old kitchen before you can start with the new one. So the foundations behind the scenes have got to be firm and strong and everlasting. The other thing about Pluto is that it is the god of wealth. And so a plutocrat or a plutocracy is being ruled by the wealthy or the rich. And from under the ground comes gems and gold and silver from mining. Under Gaia is, Pluto bringing forth the riches and the beauty and the gems that one can marvel at. And even though many people would dread, let's say, a Pluto transit coming into their chart, oftentimes people come out better, or with new ideas, with a new vision, a renewed, rejuvenated, other perspectives on many different levels. So yeah, one needs to have a certain respect for this far off planet, but it's very expansive ultimately.
Stephen, can I add something here briefly?
Yeah, go please.
Okay, so, I've always heard that Pluto is the higher octave of the moon and it rules kind of the matriarchy. So I think for me, it's the concept of with Pluto having the heart shape, it's kind of love your mother. And the mother,
Very nice.
yeah, and the mother is the creator of life and sometimes death. So it's to incorporate that respect also for, and on a more mundane level, your emotions, to respect your own emotions and honor them. So
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. Yeah, and in fact, I can add to that and say that, wow, Gaia here is our mother, and it happens to be, the 22nd of April today, Earth Day, and we gotta love that mother too. And you will see here very soon that in the news, pointing right here, right now, we have got these global change, climate change crises, and the Plutonian sorts of activities and solutions are being brought to the fore at this time. Now, having introduced one of the players, Pluto, then let me introduce then the sign, Capricorn. Capricorn, an earth sign, cardinal, and it is oftentimes with us here in the northern hemisphere. It's connected to our winter and the new year beginning there, but also that winter solstice beginning of the Capricorn. The key traits associated with Capricorn, conservative, realist, organizer, love of tradition, ironic, humor, caring, instinctive protector, so many things associated with Capricorn. Many of you, of course, know a lot of those Capricornian interests and traits and so forth. But it is a prudent sign connected with a larger perspective. It has a polarity to the opposite sign, Cancer. And one thing that I do as an astrologer is that I pay attention to the Earth in a horoscope. You'll see that when I bring up one of my horoscopes very soon. And so anybody with the sun in Capricorn has got the Earth in Cancer. And so the earthy dynamic of the Cancerian, which is really wanting to take care of the home, having something solid, something that one can rely on, Capricorn is going to really try and supply that. And so with that, we have more of that classic, father, paternal energy. Sometimes it turns into father knows best, but sometimes it is just that prudent and objective perspective on what needs to be done. How can we get this project, off the ground and action? That brings us then to politics, looking at the big picture. Also, that sense of power and prestige, and wanting to be a player, wanting to have that respect. All of that is very Capricornian. This also brings, of course, into play large businesses, whether that be those who are working with the government or government sponsored, or those who are so large that they can be a government by themselves. So it's, we have large corporations, and of course, Wall Street comes into mind with Capricorn. Classically, it is overly serious when young and more relaxed when older. Did you find that true with you, Ronnie? I see that nod.
Most welcome.
Yeah, I've seen that also with others. And so with that in mind, there is a pattern with Capricorn in which there can be restrictions in the early life, recognizing now that we are also talking about a Capricorn dynamic or an aspect also connected with the United States, born on the 4th of July. And so a Cancer country with the Earth in the opposite sign of Capricorn. And yes, one can take a look at our youth, as it were. And yeah, it was rough beginnings. It was a rough birth. We had to separate from a parent that didn't want to let go. And it came to blows, as we know. And yeah, there were some dynamics. I had mentioned Pluto connected with karma. And one of the things that we're going to be seeing here are some of those karmic mistakes or assumptions that our forefathers made at the beginning that had a karmic dynamic that we're still working with today. So here's a nice little image of our Capricorn on the goat. And it's a little bit of father time. There's an impishness that you can see. There is definitely a sense of humor, kind of like a dry humor or irony. There's some mischief going on over here. And I think he's actually too big and heavy for that little goat. So, but notice the cornucopia. Notice, there are goodies to be had. This has been a good worker, and that's what they want to bring forth. So yes, we're talking about Pluto in Capricorn, and it was there at the beginning in 1776. So it was there, of course, the whole time, because that's in the natal chart, that's in the US chart. And so, yeah, think about that searing, focused, sometimes obsessive, definitely strong-minded, lacer type of dynamic here with Pluto in Capricorn that wants to make sure that we've got plenty. Okay, and so they say that we're the richest country in the world, and that kind of fits that as we go along. Then I'm going to be taking a look at another key character player in this, and that is the third house. And I'm going to, just in a minute, describe why I've got our Pluto in Capricorn in the third house. But it goes with the chart that I have been working with for a long time. I also want to mention too, in general, with third house sorts of things, the houses 3, 6, 9, and 12 are called cadent houses. We have the angular ones that begin, such as the first house, and then followed by the succedent houses, the second house, for instance, and then the third is a cadent house. And basically, it fulfills many of the things found in the prior two houses. It brings things into an expansion, into a fruition, and then we have to maintain it. Therefore, it is already in the public realm, as it were, and people have to keep the ball rolling. And that brings us to the great astrologer Michel Gauguin, French astrologer, statistician. I met him years ago in Virginia Beach when I was the president of the NCGR here in Virginia Beach. Really a very nice man, great tennis player, by the way. And he, if you haven't come across his works, I would suggest taking a look at it. He, as a statistician, he was almost like a closet astrologer, but he wanted to really, prove to the larger world, to the thinking world, to the mathematically inclined people, to the academians, that there's something to astrology. And so he collected thousands and thousands of charts and did some analyses of, are there certain planets that can be found in key professions, as in sports, writing, government, politics, and so forth. And indeed, he did find those correlations, and he found them in the cadent houses. So the planets that show up in the cadent houses are what's called the Gauguin sectors. And that's where people will find more success in society, which is very different than what I learned going on with, like the first house is, strong and independent, and you are your own boss and so forth. Well, you might be your own boss, but no one's paying attention. You got to get into the Canaan houses when the larger world, when the community and society starts paying attention to you, and then they will accept you. Then you can integrate in with your larger community. And that's what I find really great with Gogolon's contributions. Now, as we go along, I'll be talking about the third house in its many different forms. Many of you, of course, know about that. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. This is what we find in early education, as well as the exchange of ideas, designs, information. You think of your siblings here. This is the house of brothers and sisters. And by correlation, those friends in your school room. And so your neighbors, those who you were hanging out with. As you grow older, of course, it turns into your neighborhood and exchanging ideas about cabbages and bushes and flower pots and so forth with your neighbors, as well as talking with the postman and the milkman, because that's the third house. That they're just supplying those things that we need in our neighborhood. I've found many people who were involved with driving, delivering, with strong third house emphases. It's your backyard, it's your region, okay? It represents, therefore, short travels. And by traveling, you need roads. And so roads, railways, and everything connected with that, highway. But then since we're going back to school and schooling, then it's information, the exchange of ideas, different subjects, math and science and so forth. But also news, and what is the conveyor of news? Nowadays, we've got our smartphones. We're now working right here with a computer. We've got social media. So all those are connected with communication too. So keep that in mind as we talk about Pluto returning to its initial place in the US chart. The horoscope. We have to come up with something that we can start looking at and comparing things with. The horoscope of the US, as we know, 1776. There, as you probably know, various charts. I've looked at quite a few of them. And the one I use, interestingly enough, you've probably seen the Gemini rising chart. That was at 2:17 a.m. And there's been some questions about, well, where the heck did that come from? And why were the guys just using oil lamps, up at 2 o'clock in the morning? I don't see that one, but this one here I got from Mark Penfield, and he is a very good astrologer who took a very big interest in international charts, national charts, mundane astrology, and so forth. And he came across the time of 220, and I saw this more than 30 years ago, based on what he said was John Hancock's recollections of the Declaration coming out of committee. And that really intrigued me at the time. So I just looked into it, and I just made a slight change, 1 minute, when I started comparing actual things. And then 1 minute doesn't sound like a lot, but as you all know, in certain aspects, it makes it very exact. So that's why I've been using that one. And here we have, that chart, the 2:19 p.m. chart here for the United States. And you'll see that it's got that 8 degrees Scorpio rising. And the ruler of the chart, therefore, is Pluto, because it rules Scorpio. And that's what we find down at the bottom of the chart in the third house. And there is Pluto, 27 degrees Capricorn, 33 minutes. And that is, the exact degree and minute that is being calculated here just this past February, when it went exactly to that very same degree. Recognizing that there's always an orb with all of the planets. And with Pluto, with a 248-year cycle, one can imagine that it should have probably a rather large orb. And I have come across other astrologers who say, well, basically the Pluto return for the United States probably should be calculated back to when Pluto entered Capricorn. And as I said, that's already 2008. I don't particularly believe that, but it just shows that there's different ideas about these things. And I still use this orb, and I go back about 5 years with Pluto, back to 2017, when we had a plutocrat who was the president of the United States. So I believe approximately then that Pluto return really kicked in when Trump became president. And some of the various things that we saw, sometimes biting our nails, was connected to almost like a classic Plutonian. There are, as I had said before, there are different evolutionary levels of Pluto, just like in all planets. There's like a young Jupiterian who's going to trip over his feet, and there's going to be the wise educator and philosopher, when they have a little bit more maturity. So and that's true with all planets. It's also true with all signs. And so, yeah, I think that we had a rather young Pluto, to be polite, there with Mr. Donald Trump. And that started, as I said, in 2017 when he became president. So we got a 5-year orb. And one could say then from now, 2022, should we add another 5 years, bringing us to 2027? One could say that, yeah, you could probably do that. But I'm thinking that, prior to it going to that 2027, it's going to actually leave the sign of Capricorn. It'll go into the next sign of Aquarius. And so I think that changes the dynamic. It goes into yet another sign. So I would say from now, I would give it another 3 years, approximately. And so it's not, like just 1 month or 3 months or 6 months that we're going to be paying attention to this, but it is a larger phase. We're in the middle of it. We've been in it for several years. And there are some things, however, very strongly connected with now that I believe that it's been signs all over the place. And I've been especially aware that since about November last year, 2021, that I've been seeing really a kick up in a lot of these things that I'm going to be talking about today as I share the news as I have found it here with Pluto. One of the reasons why I use that chart is this particular chart calculated for the attack on Fort Sumter that began the Civil War. This outer chart is the exact minute when those shells started to blaze in that attack that was officially really the beginning of the Civil War. And what's happening in those outer transits, looking over at the right-hand side of the circle, you'll see Pluto at 8 degrees Taurus, exactly opposite in a land that is going to kill each other. Remembering that the 7th house can also be seen as open enemies. Well, your open enemies happen to live in the same nation as you, but of course they wanted to secede. And that secession is found with something else very interesting in 1860, 1861, and that was the Uranus Return. It takes 84 years to go around the zodiac. And so from 1776 to 1860, that was 84 years. How about that? And Uranus was back in Gemini. Gemini, the twins, 2. And it was split into 2, the north and the south, between really, the abolitionists and those who wanted to have freedom for all, as was promised in the beginning in 1776. And that's why I say periodically we do have to visit, like the aspects of karma. And if you are saying certain things, so if you are espousing certain things, you have to probably keep your word. And we have found that was certainly not true with the natives there. Now, in this chart, Mars was also exactly on Uranus in the 8th house of death. So we have got a Mars-Uranus conjunction with a Uranus return, splitting the country into two, and then a Pluto, which is right there exactly, opposite the ascendant. So this is just one chart that I have used that I think, well, that is a very good indicator. I'm fairly convinced with that one, but there's another interesting one. In here, we have another very important time, 9/11, September 11th, 2001. And so again, I've got the US chart in the middle, and then the outer transits for exactly when the first plane hit the tower. And I imagine many of you astrologers, I'm sure you've looked at that, from time to time over the years, and especially during, 2001 to 2004, 2006, you were probably periodically looking at these planets. Now, I point this out. I mean, there's a couple of very interesting things, that show up here. But remember, my point right now is to say, why do I use this 2:19 p.m. time? And the outer chart is the secondary progression. These are not transits. These are secondary progressions. And the secondary progressions is symbolic time that looks at 1 day equals 1 year. And so, for instance, some of the outer planets that, they don't move that much, in a month or 2 or 3 months, However, up here at the top, this is, classically the midheaven. I think you can see my cursor moving up there. And it's 15 degrees Leo. And that certainly says something about the United States too, and the world events and world prestige and so forth. And in a secondary progression, the midheaven as well as the sun moves approximately 1 degree per year. So, for instance, from this 15 degrees Leo, another 15 degrees, it would be 15 years, and then it would go into the next sign of Virgo. And so that's how that's calculated. Well, from 1776, that midheaven right there went all the way around the horoscope, and it went right over here to the 5th house, and it entered Aries. And it shows up as 0 degrees Aries 0. Here's a close-up. Secondary, 0 degrees 0 at 9/11. I mean, to me, that was the clincher. And this, of course, began, remembering that we can still play with the secondaries, that this began a 20-year duel. Remember, the duality shows up many times in the US. 2 external wars started from that point that lasted 20 years. Amazing that they lasted that long. And what happened in the with the let me say, I don't know if you all know about decanates, but every sign has got 3 decanates, and they stay within those signs. And so as it went into Aries, and Aries is truly a new beginning, and it's also martial. It is Aries, the war god, and so boy, did we have, of course, all kinds of restrictions. And when we take our airplane rides today, we still know it today because there are security guards all over the place, and we are being buzzed down, etc. That started right about there. And then for the next 10 years, it would be the Aries decanate. And then the following 10 degrees, and this is true in any sign, would be the next fire sign after Aries, which would be Leo. So then from 10 to 20, that would be the Leo decanate. And it was during all that time from the first, which is Aries, which is retaliation, that we got into those two wars with Iraq and Afghanistan. And then after 10 years, one would say, well, gosh, even after 3 years, shouldn't we have pulled out? But no, it was on a roll. And then perhaps as it went into Leo, then it turned kind of into a pride thing, that we got to finish this job and it's not really being finished very well, until it ended after 20 years and it went into the Sagittarius side of that decade of Aries, when they just said, let's call our losses and get the heck out of here. And that's, what happened after 20 years. Anyway, these are a couple of different reasons why I have been using that 219 time. And I do recognize, of course, that other people can perhaps make a good statement or a defense of their preferred astrology chart. But this is my view, and I've been using it for years, and I find it very useful. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm going to be taking a look at Pluto in the third house this evening. And you'll see that it makes a lot of sense. A lot of those things that I had talked about with the third house, connect to the third house, are very much connected to that. Let me also add another interesting element, and that is this thing that we have Inauguration Day. And perhaps some of you know, to augur in, and an augur was an ancient Roman diviner who would predict or foretell the future. And so a lot of politicians, a lot of political science people, they use the word Inauguration Day, but they don't really know what inauguration means. But us shamans, us metaphysicians, this is the stuff that we play with. So the Inauguration Day, as it says right here, began with George Washington. He was elected and inaugurated as president. He was inaugurated for the first time on April 30th, 1789, and then again on 1793. And the subsequent inaugurations were held on March 4th until the second inauguration of FDR. And that was changed to January 20th, 1937. Now, what I'd like to point out here is that this happened then after Pluto was discovered in 1930. And I'll explain that in just a second. Since then, since the FDR, the Inauguration Day has been held on January 20th, and the office officially starts at 12 noon on that date. And so it makes it very interesting when we are, predicting, who might win an election. Then this one of the charts that we can pretty much rely on is that 12 noon chart for Washington, D.C. on the 20th. Here is the Biden inauguration chart. And again, classically, 12 p.m. noon there in Washington, D.C. And one could compare that with his natal chart, but just the inauguration chart itself is pretty interesting, because remember, the closer that we get to now, 2022, we are in the middle of the exact Pluto return. Take a look at the very top up there in the 9th house, and you'll see Pluto at 24 degrees Capricorn. Remembering that at the famous 23 degrees is when we had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and that was the beginning of the pandemic, the virus, the COVID-19. And so here is Pluto right there. And of course, as you all know, there has been waves and waves of the COVID-19 affecting this land, and of course around the world too. Point here, it says note the MC, okay, recognizing that these inauguration charts since FDR set for 12 noon, it's going to have basically the same ascendant, the same, the same houses, that it's the same time, it's 12 noon. And look at the midheaven right up here, 26 Capricorn. See that? Sometimes, depending upon the year, it could be like 27 degrees, but it's 26 degrees. And that means that that midheaven pointing right straight up when the president takes his vows is pointing towards our natal Pluto. Whichever chart you choose to work with. Okay, that is where our Pluto is. And so I then have to wonder, has then since FDR, has the president played the role of being the spokesman for Pluto in Capricorn in the third? And when you think about it, you know, just like when we had the attacks on 9/11, what did George W. Bush say about New York? We're ready for business. We'll be back to business. It's going to be okay. You know, and of course, the business of America is business. I mean, isn't that a classic, again, Capricorn sort of thing? Now, outside of that, and this is just another interesting thing that is found again with all presidents making their vows at that point, being essentially, you know, holding up high midheaven up in the sky. Here's our Pluto. This particular one, of course, has the returning Pluto going back to that point. And hasn't Biden been under Plutonian attacks? I mean, all kinds of conspiracies about him. I was here recently in Florida, and somebody said, you know, Biden, you know, he's not the same person as he was, you know, under Obama. It's not even the same face. Somebody replaced him. They also replaced other people like Hillary and so forth, and John F. Kennedy actually wasn't dead. I got that all in the same conversation with this fellow. But but again, all kinds of conspiracies there, which I can't think of as a second house thing, but maybe as a third house thing of splintering off ideas, notions, perspectives, and of course, conspiracies. I find this chart a little bit dangerous for him as a president, by the way. Look at this moon over here in the 12th house, the 12th house classically of hidden enemies. 29 degrees Aries, Aries, of course, the war sign, right next to and conjunct Mars and Uranus. Mars and Uranus conjunct same degree, 6 degrees Taurus. I mean, yeah, he is, you know, the country, one can say, is split. And that split shows up here. Here's now Taurus squaring up here Saturn, Jupiter at the top. Oh, it's close enough for a square to the sun. Okay, making it a T-square because I always use the Earth down here opposite. So yeah, our country divisible, under God, under tarnation. And so again, just an interesting chart in and of itself, but that's not exactly why we're here. But I just thought you'd find that interesting.
A question?
Yeah.
To me, the obvious thing would be to incorporate Biden's chart into this whole mix. I see how important the inauguration chart is. And I don't know if you do that or you're going to add that into this group. At what point do you add the impact of the personal chart of the presidents in with the inauguration chart to, like you said, he might be acting out as a spokesman for Pluto in the third house and so on. So that would compound it if we showed up in his personal chart.
Yeah, very good point, Ronnie. And that would perhaps even be more true with Biden because that Pluto is there so close to the midheaven. And he is a Scorpio. And he's got several planets in Scorpio, you know, which is very Plutonian right there. And he is now very gingerly, very carefully, and even with a probably no small amount of sweat, he is looking at Putin on the international scene, and Putin has already mentioned nuclear weapons. I mean, we haven't, as a nation, as a world, we haven't been in this much danger since, the early Cold War. So yeah, it's very, very significant. I haven't prepared to take a look at Biden's chart. That could be another really interesting one. But one can say that in general, this Pluto return, as I go along and talk about some of the different items happening in the news, it really shows up a lot, with what our government is doing, what the president has to respond to, what the nation is dealing with. So it's all rather interesting and complicated, but I'm going to move on to the main focus.
Thank you.
Here we are right now. And even though it's now April, here is the transit chart on the outside here for the 20th of February 2022. And that was when Pluto exactly, by calculation, went back. And one could even just play with that chart right there, very much like a solar return or a Saturn return. Here we have a Pluto return. And so you see at the bottom here in the third house, natally here, that's the 1776 chart, and Pluto's 2733 degrees. And here again on the outer chart, Pluto is 2733. And then one could read this all by itself, as wow, all the different things that it's kind of promising, potentially what is underground, what is obvious, and so forth. Well, you can see it's a very packed, third house. But even if you don't even use this particular house system or this particular chart of the 219, it's very packed Capricorn. And so we will be talking about money, we'll be talking about finances, and since Pluto is involved, there shall be some skullduggery. There is going to be some things going on here, and the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing, and there shall be some schemes and some tricks, and but that's what the god of the underworld did and showed, during its time of appearance in the 1930s, and also, by the way, the 1930s was so much of a time about different political systems coming to strong opposition to each other, to the point where we had the fascists in the world against pretty much like the capitalist democracies, and of course all that turned into war. So no small thing here. But let me now bring us to some of the wilder things going on here, as we now just let it all out in the third house. And I've got my list of items right here, like a news reporter, maybe like Saturday Night Live, but maybe even a little bit closer to Billy Joel, when he said, "We didn't start the fire." And then he goes on to make a list of all the different people and situations, that happened before, we showed up. And it's the same thing here too. We didn't start the fire, but there's all kinds of fires going on in the world right now. Here is a very interesting thing here. Arizona State Senator Wendy Rogers. She opposes free speech for satanic demons. Now, I thought this would be a great news item to begin our discussion of, the hot topics here. Pretty wild, huh? This is a state senator. And so she starts off here with this tweet, freedom of speech is a human right granted by God. Companies and governments who go against this are going against rights that make up the essence of humanity. And then later on, she says, because, there was some backlash, right? So she's responding to what people said about her sanctimonious statements. This, he says, the nasty, vile, satanic demons who post wicked pictures and videos on my channel have a special place in hell for their evil. Get behind me, Satan. Are we in the realm now of Pluto return? Now, from this, there was an article I read, somebody covering this particular tweet, and this is from the Arizona Republic, which is a fairly large size publication. When I first read this, I thought, wow, what kind of a crackpot is this? You know, from probably some obscure little blog that nobody reads. No, it's the Arizona Republic that this was printed in here in the middle of April. Now, as I read this report, think of Pluto in the third house. And he says, during these difficult and divisive days, we are lucky to have reporters like Nick Martin, editor and writer of The Informant. This is where he got some information. A publication dedicated to keeping track of the many hateful extremists who infest the land. Unlike many of us in the news business, Martin is willing to delve deep into the lower intestine of the internet, the dark, fetid bowel of social media one needs to explore in order to find and expose those who spew the most noxious and repulsive doublespeak. Are we in Pluto land, by the way? And then he reports this particular tweet by Wendy Rogers. And she gave a speech at a white nationalist conference calling for public hangings and for her ugly social media attacks on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. She claimed at the time it was an attack on her free speech, a concept Rogers has never quite grasped and still doesn't. This is the freedom to spew hateful attacks. After all, the fact that you could publicly complain about an attack on your free speech actually proves that you still have free speech. Still, she went on her rant and continues to rant and continues to draw contributions to who share her hateful, conspiracy-driven beliefs. And so that is how we can perhaps begin our little introduction into what are the news bits here going on as we take a look at what is happening in the United States. Now here I'm going to be, as I said, I've got my news reports right here. This is Friday Night Live, and I've got a couple of different things to share with you. Just some news items here connected with approximately our time in the last probably 4 or 5 months as we're having our our Pluto return in Capricorn in the third house, January 10th. The first successful heart transplant from a pig to a human patient occurs in Baltimore, Maryland. I don't know what to say. January 18th, American company Microsoft announces its intent to purchase Activision Blizzard for $68 billion. This deal is the largest acquisition of a tech company in history. This is a huge video games company. Now think again, third house. Okay, video games, big acquisition by Microsoft connected to communications and so forth. There's money to be had there. February 3rd, Islamic State leader Abu Ibrahim is killed during a counterterrorism raid by US Special Forces in northwestern Syria. And I asked myself, we've got covert troops in Syria now? But that's part of that third house thing. Then we had March 4th, the invasion the Russian invasion of Ukraine, foreign news outlets, including the BBC, CNN, and many others, halt their reporting in Russia after new legislation in Russia threatens a 15-year jail terms for spreading fake news. Now I have to ask, well, we could import some of that over here. And then on March 15th, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Russia announces new sanctions on several US officials, banning President Joe Biden, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and others from entering the country. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is also banned. I imagine none of them slept well that night. Think again about the third house and education, younger education, elementary school on into high school, and think of Pluto there. And then let's talk about US school shootings. This is something not just happening this year. This is, I mean, it is a sad tale that I have seen so many times, and it seems to have been amped up, I think, in the last 20 years, because when I was in school, I remember spitwads. You know, there were some fights, you know, on the recess grounds, but we didn't have any shootings. Maybe I was just like overly protected, but I think of snipers and Pluto, and I think of dangerous things, of course, with Pluto, and including, of course, death in our educational system. You know, and it's just right there. And as I was taking a look at some different news items happening just this year, January, February, March, April, how many school shootings have there been? I remember when Obama was president and he had to give another speech about a school shooting. And he was so tired after, you know, what was his 10th one, you know, during his presidency. You know, when will that end? Another thing that happened here recently, though, is that remember the shooting of those young children in elementary school. Where was that at?
That was Connecticut.
Yeah, in Connecticut. Yeah.
But
And
you know,
it was,
sorry, there's another school shooting going on today.
oh my goodness. Yeah, of course. You know, it's sad, but it's just built into the US system, unfortunately. And they say that's, you know, partly because there's too many guns. Well, you know, I spent a lot of time in Switzerland. You know, every family has got a gun over there too, and they don't have these killings. But who was that famous newscaster, right-wing newscaster, that said that it wasn't Lakeland, it was Sandy Hook with the young kids, and he said it never happened. Okay, just in the last 2 months, he had to retract those words, and he's being sued, you know, because those parents in the last few years since he came out and said it never happened, they were getting death threats for making up this stuff. It's like, what craziness here. So, yeah, another interesting thing that we have all seen lately is inflation. And take a look now at Pluto in Capricorn, and does Capricorn want to make a buck? Does Capricorn want to have profit? Of course it does. And so we've got Pluto here as coming up on the Capricornian placement there, and everything has gone up. It started off here during the pandemic, when we had the supplies and the supply chain, which brings us back to the third house. Home building supplies people were not going out and working, so they went back home and they were doing home projects. Remember when all that was happening? And they were buying a bunch of things, and then up goes the prices of wood and other things connected with your home supplies. Obviously, here recently we've got the price of gas. Gas has gone up so high, and that is happening coincidentally during a Pluto return. And again, I'm thinking third house because gas is dealing with vehicles. Then there's this thing about inflation and higher prices with homes and housing. Now, typically, I'm thinking, houses is a classic fourth house thing. But you can't really have a corporation in the fourth house. But you do have some businesses that work with homes, like large condominiums, subdivisions, 55 plus, condominiums and so forth. And so that's a large group of people. That's now a business connected with where people live. But I'm thinking now that, what is it why did the prices go crazy around the United States this year? And I'm thinking again, I found out that Wall Street, they have got lots of stock portfolios that have put huge investments into homes and buying private homes, putting them into their portfolios. There have been some movements by some legislators who say, that should not be happening. You need to keep the big business out of private homes because it's raising the prices for everybody. But it just happens to be another thing that, is really quite evident that we see that our neighborhoods are becoming pretty expensive. And I think that's what that is about. I'd mentioned here that we have got that Pluto, and we saw that in the chart of the Biden inauguration, and it reminded me of the COVID-19 sort of thing. We're still in the middle of that, and we're just still recovering from that. But that happened in the third decade. I've already mentioned the decades before. This was in the third decade of Capricorn. First decade is Capricorn. The second decade of Capricorn would be the second Earth sign after, which would be Taurus. And then the third decade would be the third Earth sign after Taurus, and that would be Virgo. So that conjunction, the Saturn-Pluto thing connected to the pandemic, is in a Virgo decade, which is talk about health, a health crisis, both internationally, but also all of those reactions connected to how are we supposed to behave, or how is the government, Capricorn, wanting to tell us how to act in an emergency. And as we know, there were all kinds of reactions to that, mostly about, our freedoms and what kind of a country is this, and so forth. Yeah, so that is something also connected with that. Other things happening here, but I would like to finish this idea here of what is about the COVID-19 and what happened to all of the billions that went into helping the Americans to recover at that point. Well, they just came out with this audit, and this fellow right here, David McSwain, he just wrote this book called Pandemic Inc. And who got rich? And we're talking about all kinds of schemes that happened from the very beginning. And I remember periodically coming across that, but we're talking about, again, Pluto in the third house of communication. And so we've got some swindlers, we've got some con artists, we've got people, trying to get whatever they can and using a situation, an emergency situation, and trying to make a profit out of that. I remember years ago talking with somebody who worked for the International Red Cross, and he said, if there is a hurricane, let's say, in Florida, within days, there are going to be fake businesses popping up wanting to get on the gravy train. Okay, so this happens probably everywhere we have capitalism, but it really does seem to be something here. Well, anyway, in this one here, 21 people have been charged in the past 9 days, and this just came out here on the 20th of April, as part of a nationwide enforcement push to root out those who exploit the pandemic through healthcare fraud schemes. The cases resulted in about $150 million in alleged false billings and theft from federal pandemic assistance programs. And some of the defendants are accused of offering COVID-19 testing to get people to provide their personal identifying information, as well as saliva or a blood sample. And that information and the samples were then allegedly used to submit fraudulent claims to Medicare for unnecessary, far more expensive tests or services. Amazing, huh? Just amazing. Back up here, still dealing with the Pluto news. The US legacy here. Should we talk about peace treaties with the Native Americans? Okay, now we're going back. This is our legacy. This is the US history with, I believe, Pluto in Capricorn in the 3rd house. Agreements, accords, treaties, and how many of them were taken away, taken back, revoked, reneged on. Right now, we're talking about the Great Resignation. You all perhaps have heard about that. And basically, in the pandemic time, we have got millions of people who do not want to go back to work. What they don't want to go back to work is they don't want that bullshit. They don't want to, like the 9-to-5 drudge, and the boss is always right, and you just have to bend over backwards to do whatever you need to do to keep your job that you don't even like. So the Great Resignation, it seems to be a larger social dynamic where millions of workers have said goodbye to low-paying jobs or toxic work environments. And I'd have to say, well, good for them. But I find it interesting that the word resignation is used in conjunction with this Pluto thing that likes to play with words, because you can resign from a job, or you can have resignation, which is more of I give up. Okay, and so how interesting, and how could one spin that particular word, the Great Resignation going on. Capitalism, I mean, it is right here in the United States. And I would like to emphasize that, again, the position of Pluto in Capricorn of industriousness and large businesses and so forth is in the 3rd decanate in the US chart, and that's the Virgo decanate. And let's talk about our healthcare. That is a pro-profit healthcare system as compared with all of the other Western democracies in the world, where other countries, and I lived in Europe for quite a few years, they get so much more for their investment, their money. We pay more and we get less. And so again, it's always been there. So can we get rid of it? They've been trying for years, Bernie Sanders specifically, has really tried to do that. Back to the 3rd house, student loans forgiven. This is back in the discussion again. Young people are strapped with debt. And underneath this larger thing of the US legacy, the country started off with indentured servants. And oftentimes they would get a passage from England or Ireland or Germany and so forth, and they had to work basically as unpaid servants for approximately 7 years, sometimes 3, sometimes 10. Sometimes the the employers over here in the New World, in the colonies, didn't really let them go. They just kept them. And of course, this is the land of slavery. So it's always been here, unfortunately. Now we're also dealing with climate change and the Plutonian interest in transforming our commerce. And this is like something brand new. I just read this in the Economist. It's called ecopreneurs, like entrepreneurs, but they're ecopreneurs. And finally, large businesses are working with governments to deal with climate change. And they're saying they have to come up with more clever ways and, of course, profitable ways to keep on with their commerce, with the business, but with, taking care of the earth in mind. That is front and center right now with the Paris Peace Accords and the as well as the desires that Biden has been pushing us back into working with the climate change crisis. Another interesting thing here, there are a few aspects, of course, in the natal chart, but one of them that is probably very strong is the Mercury opposition Pluto in the 9th house. And you, again, can look at the news today or look at, our history, starting off with the wonderful and exciting and promising Declaration of Independence. I mean, is that a 9th house Mercury statement in Cancer? So that opposition has always been there, but there have been over the centuries and definitely happening right now. There's been, some Supreme Court cases, judicial sorts of things, some things that we can be rather proud about, other things that we cannot be. But with that combination here of Pluto in the 3rd, Mercury in the 9th, opposition here, higher courts, judiciary, legal documents, foreign relations, 9th house, world dialogues and agreements, international accords, all of that now can be seen here with this opposition. And again, here is the chart that I use again, just to have you take a look again and see quite clearly, that opposition here, Pluto in the 3rd house down here in Capricorn, right straight up above here. Here we have Mercury, 24 degrees. Mercury, by the way, was also aspected with that Saturn-Pluto conjunction of the pandemic in 2020. And the government jumped in with all kinds of help. And of course, as we just read, some of them were con artists who took advantage of the very generous offerings that the government gave, lots of flim-flams and schemes and so forth. But good for the government that just said, hey, what can we do? And I knew many people who got unemployment as well as lots of aid during a tough time for a lot of people. And that's one of the nice things that we can say about what has been happening here recently. But another dynamic connected to that is about free speech, the ideals, 9th house of we have the right to say what we wish to say, opposed by Pluto in the 3rd. So it's always been not an easy and such a direct thing. For instance, in the news right now, this month, Elon Musk would like to buy Twitter. Now, when I think of Twitter, I think of, here's social media, and we're back to communications down here in the 3rd house. And so far, of course, Elon Musk, I mean, he is the richest man in the world right now. You may know that. And he is such an entrepreneur and visionary and so forth, very much like this Mercury up here in the 9th house. What a noble thing. And that's what he's talking about. He wants to buy Twitter to bring it to a place where free speech can again be promised. You may know the historian and author Heather Cox Richardson. Well, she is really a star in our political scene today, but she's got this to say about that. She says that today's stories illuminate the increasingly dangerous international struggle between democracy and authoritarianism. And it is dangerous right now. Democracies are at risk from authoritarianism today in large part because centralizing power in a few wealthy people permits those people to continue to pocket disproportionate shares of the national wealth. A study released yesterday by ProPublica of leaked tax documents from the Internal Revenue Service revealed how our current laws permit the very wealthy to sidestep taxes and amass greater and greater wealth. And then she goes on to talk about what Forbes has discovered, and the richest Americans not really paying their fair share, but they computed that the true tax rate for the last 5 years for these very wealthy is 3.4%. So then she says, those with virtually unlimited money can buy the tools to spread propaganda in favor of their position. That concern is behind the fight over free speech that right-wing leaders have launched against social media platforms that have excluded their lies and calls for violence. It is also behind the outcry today over the proposal of billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk, allegedly the richest man in the world, to buy Twitter for a cash offer of $43 billion. By the way, just in the last 2 days, he upped it to 46 billion because they turned him down. Yeah. Then in this ProPublica document, they found out that Musk paid no income tax in 2018. Musk says he wants to own the platform himself to make it more broadly inclusive because he believes that inclusion is extremely important to the future of civilization. So he's calling for free speech. And what he seems to also want is to give let's say, the Twitter megaphone back to those who have been kicked off. And we know one of those people is Donald Trump. So, so there's speculation here in the headline, is Elon Musk a Republican? I don't know if it's speculation, but but he also could be talking about, again, in a libertarian dynamic, purely the idea of free speech. However it's going to fall, I'll just allow that. But yeah, we have free speech in the United States, but I don't know. There seems to be sometimes some issues here. I'm going to now pull. Oh, yes, Shelley.
You're on the topic, and today they were talking about this on the PBS NewsHour. Don't you think third house is also the banning of books that just started and not allowing certain things to be taught in the schools?
Exactly. Yes, it is. Definitely. Not only banning books, classic third house, but also the pressures that they are putting on the elementary schools right now about what should be shown to young kids or not. And there are more right-wing groups that are saying anything connected with alternative types of sexuality, which is very Pluto, should not be shown to young kids. And I have to agree, you have to be careful about that. But mostly they're talking about LGBTQ issues and alternative types of relationships that they don't want their children to be exposed to, and they want to stop that.
But don't they also want to sort of change the history books and not talk about slavery and all that stuff so the kids won't feel bad?
Exactly, exactly. In fact, it's really interesting, Shelley. I was looking at these notes today when I was in an outside cafe, and a friend of mine who is a librarian, she just, strikes up a conversation, and we talked about this subject. And she says, in the libraries today, the two extremist branches are putting pressure about banning certain books, which was a bit of a surprise to me, because I heard about the right wings who want to stop any sorts of negative talk about what those people in the war between the states were doing to defend their right of freedom. But she said that besides them, on the left-hand side, we have got some extremist leftists who are also wanting to ban certain books that show in the past some negative associations with underrepresented and biased descriptions of minorities. And I'm thinking of like Mark Twain, talking about his adventures, with Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. And would that be one of the books, because it was written in the 1870s and it just happened to be a book of the times, but he's talking about Negroes, and slavery and so forth. And from what I got from this librarian, they want to stop anything that also brings a bad light upon people of color and minorities and females and so forth. So it's really interesting, again, the country divided, the left, the right, and the extremists on both sides are creating some issues. For many years, by the way, I have found that the political correctness helped to bring Trump and his message out to the larger community, because there were so many people who were pissed off about, what they can say or cannot say, and gosh, I have to be very careful. And so I cannot have an opinion, which is, by the way, being found now in a cancer culture in universities, in which I'm sure that there were millions of Americans who were saying, I'm actually tired of this political correctness, and you telling me again, back to free speech, what I can and cannot say, even though sometimes, when we're talking about KKK, we probably don't want to hear from them. But otherwise, the impingement of free speech can even show up in probably good intentioned ideas about, the political correctness, and one shouldn't say certain things to embarrass or hurt someone else's feelings, which I can totally get. But when it turned into the Frankenstein's monster, then people reacted. In fact, I've got a friend who works in the university, and just last month they had a diversity training, and a Black representative who I believe is going from university to university. This is kind of like the job that she has created for herself. And certain things that are connected to microaggressions. And this is a microaggression is something that is inadvertently said that is actually aggressive, but it's part of everyday speech. And one of her examples that she gave, this professor, was that one should not ask people, where are you from? Because that is a microaggression that might be implying, you came from some negative place, or what is your background anyway? And she stood up and said, that's absolutely, preposterous, because she, as a European citizen, I mean, they're interested in intercultural sorts of things, and where do you come from opens up all kinds of conversations. So that was just an interesting example. Back to the third house, back to free speech, back to the government there just trying to put the put the stops on sometimes even common sense.
Can I add something here?
Yeah.
So I saw something posted on Facebook that showed that the powers that be, well, they just gave a list of books that were completely innocent, some of them, of any kind of disturbing anybody. And it kind of brought to bear the other element of Pluto, which is manipulation. So this is just, we're doing it, we're showing you we can do it because we can. And I think that's behind a lot of what's going on, including creating opposing for, concepts and opinions. And I think that's a power struggle that's really underneath all the symptoms. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, well, I also heard on NPR today that California is putting into action reparations for descendants of slaves. And there were lots of interviews with people of color, but the caveat is that you have to be able to prove that you are a descendant of slaves and trace your DNA, so it's complicated, but I'm not sure. I think, well, Pluto's in the Virgo decanate of Capricorn, which is, well, never mind that. So I'm not sure if California, I know LA is a Virgo city. Do you know what sign the state of California is? It is a Virgo state as well.
I'm inclined to think that California is Libra.
It's a Libra.
Because it's beautiful and it's fabulous and it's Hollywood and great weather and it's very pleasant. But it's also a state that too many people found out about.
People found out?
And now it's overcrowded and expensive and not so nice.
Well, I think it's a nice contrast to see that there is some fairness trying to be established in a Plutonian theocracy. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think Ronnie, you were talking, just about to talk about the astrological aspects of, again, our collective legacy here in the United States. And one of the things that I've been looking at here is this Neptune in Virgo. Okay. You had mentioned, of course, the Virgo decanate of Pluto right there. But the Neptune in Virgo, I think of that as all of the millions of slaves in the United States, as well as other people who were oppressed, who were the servants, indentured servants, women for many centuries, all right there. And what is making them behave? A square up here to Mars, 21 degrees Gemini. By force, they were slaves. And that is an interesting and unfortunate aspect going on right now. The interesting thing is that as at the same time that we're having a Pluto return, we're having a Neptune opposition this year. And Neptune is now opposite over here in Pisces, opposite that Neptune placement. And we're probably, again, the reparations story fits in perfectly with that, as well as many of the debates people are having about, how are we going to try and whitewash our history?
Can you say something?
Yeah.
Can you say something, please, about why you feel like Pluto, Neptune or Pisces rules slavery? Is it the victim consciousness?
Yes, it's the victim. It's weak. They also, many of them became very devout Christians, as well as musicals and singing and so forth. I think of all that in a Neptunian manner, but definitely the Virgo as, the underling, the worker, the person who just, does what they're told.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Some interesting things, some strange things happening also in the news, which was a little bit of a surprise, but here in this month of April, 2 Pakistani spies were caught, and they were representing themselves as Secret Service people, and they were infiltrating into the White House and into Washington, D.C., and some of them working to ingratiate themselves over a period of several years, and they were just caught, and they're now in custody. But what they did is that, of course, they came up with their false documents, which, remembering now that they're talking about with the Homeland Security, and they fooled them, and they appeared to be people who were having also an international perspective on things, but they used bribery. And so there's been at least 4 members of the American Secret Service who have been reprimanded already because they were taking bribes, including apartments. Here's an apartment. Thank you. I will take that apartment. As well as guest rides, and one had a drone, a flat screen television, a case for storing an assault rifle, a generator. These are all some of the different gifts that these 2 Pakistani spies had used. I just thought that was very interesting and fitting into, would Pluto in Capricorn in the 3rd house, is that a spy? I'd say, yeah, that would be a very good spy. It would also be a very good PR machine. Public relations and propaganda. They're in the 3rd house of communication, of telling your story, and you keep on repeating your story in a complex Plutonian manner, which isn't always direct, and it's reinforcing and even hypnotic, and bullshitting your way into telling not only the nation, but also the world, what is America about? And so I think that's always been there too, and especially when I think of the megaphone dynamic when you add Mercury up there at the top. But yeah, there's a lot of information that is purposefully gone out there, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of Americans distrust the American government. And it's come up again to the fore during this pandemic time, when what is the government trying to tell me anyway, right? And they're trying to tell me about these drugs. I don't know about these drugs. I don't have to tell you about what has been happening with so many people and movements moving towards the conspiracy side of things, of what is our government trying to do. Ratchet that up now into the election of 2020 and the big steal. And then the propaganda, Pluto, Mercury, about what happened with the secret government that took away the true winner of the 2020 election. I mean, we're back again to a country divided, to again, people on both sides, and to the point where, again, one of the words in these last Plutonian times, remember, 3rd house, is alternative facts. Alternative facts. Amazing. Yeah, but conniving and misleading and manipulative, sometimes opportunistic, and it's in the news. It's just happening. We just see it all the time. In the meantime, just to bring it back to the lascivious side of Pluto, in the news here was Congressman Madison Cawthorn under fire over claims of DC drugs and orgies. Did you hear about that? This is the Republican congressman who's in the wheelchair, and he's evidently a bright star at this point. But as of his declaration, he's no longer a bright star because he embarrassed a bunch of people, or he's lying, or he's coming up with some other crazy story. but his thing was here. He was invited to orgies and to have seen Washington figures using cocaine. Well, he's a straight-laced young man, a good Christian, and he was shocked about all of that. Then a House Democrat, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, yay for her, of New York, asked on Twitter why Republicans are acting so shocked by Cawthorn's alleged revelations about their party. One of their members, she says, Matt Gaetz of Florida, another far-right congressman, is being investigated for sex trafficking a minor, and they've been pretty okay with that. They issued more consequences to members who voted to impeach Trump. This is in the news right now during this Pluto return. Is that interesting and kind of like right on? There's more news. And Arizona Governor Doug Ducey refused to say Thursday if transgender people actually exist. He twice dodged direct questions on the subject just a day after he signed legislation limiting transgender rights. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, huh? And then I could go on. I really had lots of other stuff here, but one extra kind of wild thing that I wanted to share with you, connected with the mobster idea of Pluto, is the latest craze called the smash and grab or flash mob crimes. How many of you heard about that? It's amazing that you get like 10 people up to 80 thieves crashing a particular store or a mall, and in a blitzkrieg, they just smash things. They come in with crowbars, they come in with hammers and so forth. They steal thousands and thousands of dollars within minutes, and up to 80 people at a time. Then they all rush out to their cars and take off, overwhelming, of course, the local security. And it's a local thing. I found quite a few different articles about this, called the smash and grab approach to theft. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, crazy stuff, but it's a thing. And one could even say a rather clever way that, you know, you overwhelm them. They're not going to catch everybody. They may catch no one because they have all got a hammer in their hands, and so they rush in, break things up, steal the stuff, take off. Smash and grab is happening in the United States, and I've got quite a few different, you know, pages actually of articles about that. It's just so wild. And one more sex item for Pluto, not only in the news, but something, again, rather titillating. The Playboy Bunnies this year had that 10-part series about Hugh Hefner as a predator and the sex cult and worse. It was called The Secrets of Playboy, an A&E documentary that began in January. I mean, I didn't watch it, but I know that it, you know, many people did, and but it was like all kinds of gossip and all kinds of things that came from that, and really molestation, underage kids, rape was mentioned, and then also his buddy Bill Cosby was also mentioned, because Bill Cosby, America's favorite dad, was also a frequent visitor to the Playboy Mansion, and he was also accused at the time of what he was doing there. But you know that he was tried several years ago about all of the crimes that he did, drugging women and raping them. But last summer he got out of jail. Did you know that? Yeah, they let him out of jail. And then the Supreme Court just recently, just here in March, stepped in because the Pennsylvania court said, well, our good man, Bill Cosby, had his rights trampled when he was unfairly sentenced. And so the Pennsylvania court said, oh, you're right, we're going to let him free. From that point, then they retaliated and say, you can't do that. He did this to many women. So they took it to the Supreme Court. And in March, they rejected listening to it because they came up, of course, with their legal wording about it. But we have to remember that 2 members of the Supreme Court have also been accused of sexual improprieties. And that is in the news right now. And they did this under the times under President Trump when they caught Bill Cosby and they tried him. Therefore, under a president who had also been accused of multiple examples of molestation and rape. So this is a Plutonian story for sure, connecting to, again, the 3rd house and the 9th house as far as I'm concerned. By the way, how they got Cosby out of it, this is so Plutonian. So he gave an affidavit sometime like in 2012 or 2014 or something like that of what he did. And they promised him that he would not be, his words would not be used against him. So then he spilled the beans and he said exactly what he did and how he drugged the women and so forth. And then they did use that against him, I think, as they should, because it was a confession. But he was told that they wouldn't use that against him. And that is why the Pennsylvania court said, oh, in that case, you should not have used that, his confession, against him. I mean, this is law and justice. Not the first time that has happened. Anyway, so those are quite a few of the different things going on in the news. I could go on, but we have come to a point where we can perhaps wrap things up here. Those of you who can read, you'll get nervous. So that's what I had to say here on the USA Pluto Return. Thank you, Asheville Friends of Astrology, for asking me to come over and share with you. Lots of interesting points. One can indeed go on with this. It just is in the news all the time, and it's amazing to really see it up close and in our faces. So there we have it. Any questions? Any gnashing of teeth? Yes, Ronnie.
This, I don't know if you're willing to take this on, possibly. With the United States chart, I'm wondering about the nodal axis. If you're taking, South Node as previous learnings and the North Node, the direction you're going, and it's a very young country, and then you're looking at the North Node in Leo, is it? At the midheaven? Is that the North Node? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see the chart.
I can bring it back.
What is, okay, considering that the United States is the cauldron of humanity, bringing people from all over the world, it has to play a major part in the evolutionary scheme. So
Yes.
If you're going to incorporate Pluto as an evolutionary catalyst, and you've got the North Node in Leo, is it Leo? Yeah, in the ninth house. I mean, part of it has to do with philosophies and beliefs coming from the heart, but I also see a grand trine in water if you're going to include Ceres in Pisces. And that Neptune is not the most elevated planet, but it seems to me one of the pieces would be, since all of this dark energy has been going on, manipulation on slavery on the planet has been going on forever, it has to do with ascertaining what truth is. And so going through the depths of corruption and inhumanity to find the heart and spirit of where consciousness could go. I don't know, it's a little scattered. Your thoughts on that? Especially
Yeah,
the
very
nodal
interesting. And you
Sorry?
mentioned a couple of different things, including that trine in water. But with the lunar nodes, that would be interesting, because some countries, just like humans, we've got our reincarnation, and we have the death and the rebirth and so forth. And but in a country, it's like a previous administration, or it was another country and even another name, or part of another nation before, and then it turns out to be the country that it is. So yeah, I imagine that one can look at previous incarnations with nations. Ukraine is a country as an example of that, because it was part of the Soviet Union. It really wasn't Ukraine, it was something else, and it was at one point part of Poland, another part of Lithuania. So it's had many incarnations, and so I imagine one could do that with the nodes. I have never done that, but I can understand how it could happen. How I would look at the nodes, and specifically here of the United States, again, with the Leo up here in the North Node in the ninth house. I mean, what a great place that is. And like it or not, the United States has been a beacon of inspiration for many people, many individuals, and many nations, including the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, as well as some of the great things, art, inventions, innovations, the light bulb, movies, Hollywood, great music. I'm thinking Leo here, and it's just like going out and out, spewing out of this country, going around the world, to inspire and to entertain and to give people like new ideas and new visions. Another thing, by the way, ninth house is higher education, and we have got some excellent universities in this country. And again, examples to the world. And again, that would be perhaps yet another level of looking at this Leo in the North Node up there. Now, there's always the opposite. And down here in Aquarius, in the third house, this could be, and by the way, sometimes the South Node can be seen as kind of a Saturn, and the North Node like Jupiter. But it also could be, the South Node is kind of like a negative, something that you're trying to leave, you're trying to get over, and you're moving towards the North Node. There's different ways to read that. And looking at the Aquarius dynamic here, even though Aquarius always has got a good rap, a negative aspect of that is to join together in bands, clubs, groups of a negative sort, because it is the South Node, like the Ku Klux Klan, like certain parties from certain times, like lynch mobs, and as well as a hunting party to go off and hunt for savages who were here before us, but we're going to take care of them. We're going to get them out of our land. So this could be like the dark eye of the South Node as a polarity to the wonderful idealism of the ninth house, of the promise of what could be if we ignore some historical truths. Does that make sense?
Yes, I see. So that you can even start with the youth of the country, even though it's just a few hundred years old. We still have a past that is being geared toward a higher expression, a creative expression of what is available. So it's not limited just because the country is a shorter number of years. So thank you. That's very informative. Thank you.
Mhm.
I have
I'd also like
I
to.
would,
Oh, let me say one more thing connected to what you said, Ronnie. When you were talking about that grand trine, that's very nice. Here we have in water, early water, we've got Ceres over here in Pisces in the 4th house. Of course, the other, is the rising sign, early Scorpio. And then over here, we have got Venus and Jupiter, both of them in Cancer. And when you take a look at the bread basket of the world, and about how we have made such great innovations in agriculture and productivity and wealth, and I think specifically towards foods and grains and so forth, because I'm talking about Ceres, the asteroid. We get our word cereal from that. So yeah, that is also one of the great things that we're known for.
Right.
So Ted, did you want to say something?
yeah, going back to the nodes, there's also a positive aspect to the South Node, and in terms of traditionally resources and talents. But how I would see that here is the sort of the foundational aspects of the country being in revolution, and ideas that were truly revolutionary back in the 18th century about the brotherhood of humanity, or brotherhood, sisterhood of humanity in today's terms, although back then it was definitely brotherhood. And sort of forming the fuel for the idea that Leo idealism, beaconism, that expressed through ninth house philosophical structure. It all sort of comes from that Uranian, those Uranian resources that lie at the heart of the founding of the country. In at least in I mean, there are different stories, and but the sort of one of the foundational stories, or maybe one of the foundational myths of the founding of the country, certainly incorporates those Uranian ideals, those Aquarian ideals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good point, Ted. And as you were talking, I'm reminded of the Iroquois Confederation. And again, predating the formation of the country, but the forefathers were very impressed by the Native American grouping up there. I think it was in the New York area, where the Iroquois and other tribes they had a very clever and progressive organization from which came our ideas.
Anything else?
Betty, did you want to say something? Go ahead. I can't hear you. You have to open there. Okay.
Here we go. Okay. Yeah, I had actually typed it in the chat, but do you expect things to get much worse for the US and the world before they start getting better? Like, is there a light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, if we really take a look at the dynamics of Pluto, we're talking about death and transformation and then rejuvenation. Right now, skirmishes, the writing on the wall, conspiracy theories, a lot of rumbling. We had the January 6th attack on the Capitol. So it's like, that's not exactly the big, tough Pluto thing yet. So I'm wondering, I hope not, but I'm wondering, could things be sparked off with the Ukrainian war? And then we still have millions of people who are absolutely certain that Joe Biden did not win. And you know, they don't seem to be going away, and they don't seem to be prone to getting the facts, as well as there's been quite a few lawsuits, as you may know, another like third house, ninth house thing, many lawsuits about the validity of the various districts and states that found nothing. You know, so it has not gone anywhere, but the rumbling has gone on anyway. And that's a Plutonian thing. It goes underground. Okay. And so there are probably a lot of people, I'll say millions, who would love to see a revolution, who would love to overthrow that terrible Joe Biden and those Democrats. And we're not just talking about a difference of opinion.
Well, and that has been my concern with the whole birth, death, and rebirth theme of Pluto, and of course, being the Pluto return for the USA. It's like, okay, are we still going to have a democracy, a democratic government 4 years from now? Or is this a turning point in the history of the US, which could go either way? It could go better, it could go worse. I'm hoping it'll go better.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Always hoping for the best too.
Right.
But as you probably know, as we look a little bit forward, Pluto goes into Aquarius. And that gives me a little bit more hope about where it can transform and become positive, where maybe we can really look at our ideals and then really start living them. And that's part of my hope. The other thing is Aquarius as a fixed air sign, hopefully would bring logic and rationality into our public school systems, you know, because that is where I think the biggest problem lies. You know, if this many adults have such ideas that are really irrational and not connected to facts, you know, but alternative facts, then we have to have a revolution in our school system to, you know, way beyond arithmetic and mathematics and grammar, but you know, logic and reasoning, and that there is, where can you create common sense, basically. You know, I'm hoping that it can go in that direction. However, right after that, then we have got this really interesting Saturn-Neptune conjunction in the beginning of Aries in 2025, 2026. And I believe, you know, that's called the communist alignment, right? You look back in history and there's always something big happening in the communist world when those two get together. And so it could go in that direction, recognizing that this isn't a alignment that's going to be worldwide. It's not just a United States thing. But here in the United States, I'm looking at whoever's elected in 2024 is either going to set it off one way or the other. It's either going to be right wing, and then there's going to be a reaction, and then we're really going to have, you know, I'll just say a liberal wave with that in the United States. And you know what? It could be just as simple, and I think Elizabeth Warren is talking about this, of having the universal income. And that is a game changer if that ever happens, because then we have got, you talk about the great resignation, when people are just like tired of the old stuff, and those bosses who are not very fair and caring. If everybody's got the universal income, it's like, you can't tell me what to do, and I don't have to put up with that bullshit, and we're all getting paid the same thing anyway. And so let's build something really cool. Let's build a utopia. So I think it could go actually in that direction. Probably in other countries, there will be revolutions and new attempts at hopefully a smarter version of communism in 25 and 26.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Andrew Yang started that concept of a certain amount of money for every individual. And he started a new party, and guess what it's called? Forward.
Forward. Excellent.
So,
Very good.
so he may run again, who knows, but that's
Yeah.
good ideas.
Yeah.
And
He was like a breath of fresh air, I remember.
Yeah.
My man, Bernie was striving to do, and kind of a simpler way, you know, he was talking about, you know, the $15 an hour, you know, and, you know, and for years, he was really pushing that, you know, and he's always been very good with and consistent in his ideas, and also inspired by the Scandinavian countries the whole time. And it's been rather sad, you know, with this inflation and with the rise of costs, as well as student debt here in the United States, that I think that we have been reaching that $15 finally that he was talking about years ago, but it almost disappeared with the rise of groceries, the rise of homes or real estate and so forth. And so it's almost like, okay, well, you got it. It's like, so what? It's gone. It's a bit sad.
Right.
Yeah.
I know here 2 years ago, they were striving to get to the $15 an hour minimum wage here. And I think in Asheville, a lot of businesses did that. And now they're saying that in Asheville, you actually have to make at least $17,000 or $17 an hour to be able to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. You know, so like you say, $15 an hour was a goal 5 years ago, but now we've already passed that. And, you know, you really need 20 an hour to give you the same lifestyle as 15 would have 5 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. And that is really quite amazing that it's gone up so fast. Yeah, yeah. I just been visiting friends over in Washington State. I'm over here, of course, in Virginia right now. I was recently in Florida, and across the nation, the prices in 1 year for real estate has gone up about 100,000 per property, just in general. And it's like, that's 1 year. It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay, then.
Great.
Thanks again for having me over, and it's great talking with all of you and sharing these different ideas. Personally, as a Scorpio, the Pluto is certainly not my enemy, and I'm not afraid of it because it's got a heart on it and a cosmic love letter. And so to transform ourselves, and that is something that any shaman, medicine person, a person along the path of consciousness must travel to get to that point where we grow, we come to a certain self-awareness, we recognize that we've got some healing to do, and there might be some tears and some pains, but we do it, and then comes our greater perspective from that, a greater understanding from that. And I think of Pluto when I think of such things.
Thank you, Stephen.
Very nice.
Very, very good. And
You.
we will.
And Stephen, I'm sure, has books out also. Or are you still working on your book, Stephen?
I'm working on my next one, but I do already have 2 published on reincarnation.
Yes, I have one. Excellent, excellent books.
With my hypnotherapy cap on, just specifically just with hypnosis and into past lives as well as life between lives. But since I'm always an astrologer listening in on their stories, I'll oftentimes put their sun sign or something else I find significant in the stories.
And you also have a sort of tarot card type of app that you make available to people online. I can't use it because I don't have that kind of phone, but it sounds fabulous.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Thank you, Ronnie. Yes, I created an app called Watch It, and that's watch dash hit, HIT, but it sounds like Watch It. And it's a left brain, right brain app. And when you put it sideways, on the left-hand side is a regular clock going around. And on the right-hand side, we have symbols coming and going, kind of like representing symbolic time. And so you can have it right there in the background and recognize that, well, it's 7 o'clock and there's the happy face.